Lesson number 12 is welcoming you to another discussion and elaboration of the concept of law by Herbert Leonis Adolphus Hart, an English professor and a legal mind that has made huge contribution in the literature of the legal positivism. He first of all taught and made a lot of contribution when he was still in the United Kingdom. Later, he relocated to the United States of America, where he was one of the bona fide scholars and lecturers of jurisprudence at the University of Harvard, the School of Law. And in this case, Hart is really one of the personalities in the jurisprudence who we cannot afford to ignore. Our section here, number 12.1, we need to give the objective of the jurisprudence, looking at its development, its genesis. How does it develop? How does the jurisprudence move from one stage to the next? And what is the systematic thought about the law by jurists, by scholars, by law professors, by those who have come up with theories that we always make reference to? As we can see under our section 12.2, this one comes into reality, approaching it from the criticism that has been raised against the Austinian definition of law. And in this case, such critiques also bring the development in the understanding of what is law, what is justice, what are rights and duties. And this is the basis for this kind of our understanding. Hart picks it from Austin. In the first three chapters, Hart is looking critically at the command theory of law and the question of patterned obedience, the behavior of people while obeying the law, in which, according to Austin, people just have to obey the command of the sovereign. In that case, the sovereign is the political authority that enacts or writes the law and makes that law enforceable among the people. In this case, Austin, his description of obedience of law as a habit or as a pattern of behavior is insufficient according to H.L.A. Hart. And in this case, the concept of law under chapter 3 and 4 looks at the critiques of habit. It is not the question of habit. It is the question also of the inner morality, internal morality, in which in this case, the reference is made to the conscience, to the rationality, the power of reason, or the work of human mind. This is again enabling us to understand Hart very critically when Hart looks at the question of the sovereign, because the sovereign as a monarch, if the monarch dies, then his successor will also make the law. But what is the connect between one king and his successor when it comes to the continuity of law, the persistence of law? And in this case, Hart is adding a very important and significant contribution to the concept of institutional law, Law is an institution, and it is within that institutional concept that we should understand the law. That means law has got the perpetual succession reality in which, despite the change of the sovereign, the law is supposed to persist without changing. It is not that when the sovereign changes, the law changes. This is actually indeed very informative. Section 12.3, we better look at Austin, whose idea of the monarchism limits the definition of law to the system in which the king is the absolute authority in the lawmaking process, and this leaves out the people. This leaves out what we refer to under the legal positivism as the social dimension of the nature and characteristic of law. Section 12.3.1, habits actually are historical phenomena. They are just customs, and this one cannot explain to us what the law, in terms of its authority and obedience, is all about. In Austinian definition, people just obey the law. It is a pattern. You find yourself obeying King 1, again King 2, King 3. And in that process, every king is making his own laws. And that one would again give us what we'd call the disconnect with the continuity, which is an aspect of the nature of law in this case. In his book, published in 1961, The Concept of Law, Hart is seeking to look at the authority of law that is drawn from within the law and the nature of the law. In terms of rules, he replaces what Austin had referred to as command theory with the rules theory. So according to him, law is a system of rules, and those rules he divides into primary, secondary, and rules of recognition, in which the primary rules is what is relevant to the theory of command in defining law by Austin, and that is the written act of parliament, which of course, according to Hart, is a system of rules, a chain of rules. But these rules also get their authority as law, as binding, as force of law from another set or category of rules. These are the secondary rules. They are the rules that we know as the rules of procedure. Those are like the standing order in parliament, or the procedures known as judicial procedures, criminal procedures, civil procedures. And in this manner, the procedural law is binding upon the administrators of law, the civil servants, state officers or public officers who are supposed to work within such institutions. And in this manner, the procedures, if followed to the letter, should give the primary rules their deserved authority. The primary rules is what translates into the substantive law, the law in itself. And that, in that case, it is applied generally across the board, not only among, let us say, the elite or the professionals who are supposed to administer it. Moving forward, where does the standing order or the procedural rules get their authority from? They get their authority from the rules of recognition, which Hart is explaining under chapter 6, which I invite all of you to read. In that case, he looks at the recognition that the society, the community is recognizing those rules by giving power to the elected, such as the legislators, to make the procedural rules. Procedural rules or secondary rules are enabling them to make the primary rules. And that in that chain, Hart is helping us to understand and battle with the reality of law as a construct of the social reality. Law comes from human institution. And this is also to depart from the naturalist theory, which had already alluded to some moral authorities beyond the law or outside the law. Hart sees that law gets its authority from within itself, from within its essence and structure. And that is actually the standing point of the legal positivists from the classical period of the development of the analytical school of jurisprudence, in which Austin is battling with the rejection of the naturalist theory. Well, we will be spending a lot of our time discussing the debates between the positivists and the naturalists. But in this case, we see that as much as Austin was looking at the personal law in terms of the relationships between the king and the subjects or the citizens or the people of the kingdom, Hart is expounding on the institutionalization of the law. And in this case, he looks more at the lawmaking, taking into account the legislature. Our section 12.5, law is a system of rules. And in this case, there is no place for habits to justify its obedience in terms of patterns, but it has internal morality, which of course refers to the human conscience, because law is only concerned with the human beings, not other beings. In this case, section 12.5.1, for instance, if you go into a church, this is an example that Hart is using to enable us understand his argument. Then the rule requires you to remove your hat. But if you disobey and get in wearing your hat, of course, you are going to create some annoyance, some disturbance, because you are disobeying the rule. In that case, you can as well be thrown out or asked to remove it by force. But how about if you have the habit of going to cinema on Saturday? That is just a habit. If you don't go, nothing happens. That is not a rule. So he's trying to distinguish what Austin meant by habit or the general behavior of obedience with what are the rules that should translate into the key elements in the definition of the law. Under section 12.6, we are looking at the Hart's or Hartian definition of law as a system of rules, as opposed to a chain of commands or orders. Then from here, we divide them into primary rules, which of course are translated into substantive law. Then the secondary rules translated into procedural law, as well as rules of recognition. Under our section 12.6.3, the rules of recognition, in which Hart is trying to justify himself in terms of the chain or the linkage between his sets of rules, the primary rules, secondary rules, and rules of recognition. And he sees that there is a clear linkage between and among these rules where they derive their authorities. And if followed from the rules of recognition to the primary rules, of course, the law gets its authority. However, rules of recognition are like the basis of the jurisprudence of the law, in which Professor Hans Kelsen makes reference to the grand norms. So the grand norms of Kelsen translates into these social rules by Hart, in which we can as well see the practices, customary law, and how people create those basic rules within their community. And that is again what brings the conception of the rules of recognition by Hart. 12.7, we look at the notion of the fundamental acceptance by the society of those rules. Then we see also this in terms of the order of rules, that rules are orderly, they are linked with one another, and they form themselves into a legal system. It's a system of rules, which, according to Hart, explains the basics of the definition of law. In this case, it is very important to get this as our learning outcome, the persistence, the notion that law, or in terms of a system of rules, must be continuous. There is a link or linkage between those rules, as Hart is describing. Thanks so much for watching this video platform. I want to believe that now you are able to illustrate and explain yourself when you are asked why the law is considered a system of rules by Hart, and what are the rules and why not command. And in that case, those rules also differ. You can also address the following question: the contribution of Hart to the understanding of the connect between positivism and naturalism in the sense of the concept of the inner morality, or the concept of the human conscience that is the basis of the obedience as opposed to habit. Thank you for watching, and bye for now.